You're being recorded. You can tell them and just say, don't say anything, inappropriate.
And they second place like right there.
Keep these out, please. But you'll need them. Oh yeah, you don't have them because you weren't here on Friday. You will need to turn in this huge big packet at the end of the period. Please turn. All right. I've got the screencast on. I'm going to start improving.
Yeah. It will be sacrificed for the claim. Okay, next one. We need to.
I think those are.
Where is? All right, let me explain how I graded this big packet. And you can get points back if you want them. But how I graded them was out of 50 summative points. And the goal was if you missed a day, that by the time you turned it in, that you would have made up that day, right? At the very least, if you didn't watch the Ed puzzle, that you would have at least copied it down from somebody else, so you would have had it for note-taking. Having said that, if you missed an entire day, like if an entire day was blank, then I took off 12 points, and I circled the thing. If you had all of the days in, well, even if you didn't, what I did was I counted spaces that were empty, and I gave you 5 different empty spaces as like a grace, right? So you could get full credit with up to 5 empty spaces. But if you didn't, once you got past that, I started taking off half a point per blank space. Now, I am not opposed to letting you finish whatever you need to finish if you didn't get a full 50 out of 50 and turn it in for some points back. And like you can even make a case that you should get full points back instead of just half points back. But you've got to, do the work and talk to me about it. Okay, because that's the whole point of this thing, is to make sure that you are keeping track of your absences, etc., and that you're paying attention in class. Questions about that? Anybody? Okay. Now, what I would recommend, with the exception of Ren, is that you all, I'm going to give you notes, the Wilson notes, so if you want to turn to those real quick. And then, after this class is over, I would keep these notes and study. I plan on, maybe even 5th period, uploading all 5 PowerPoints from this unit, in addition to putting some Quizlets and quizzes up on Classroom under today's date so that you can study. The question is, have you started studying yet for this test? And if not, why? Because remember, I said this is not going to be one of those tests where the multiple choice questions are easy because they're big picture stuff. This content statement 13, is all about the little fine nitty-gritty details and examples and so on and so forth. So you should know the difference between the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act by the end of this period, for example. Right? Make your own Quizlets, make your own study notes, etc. Right? Now, can you tell me, what is this test over? I know it's scheduled for tomorrow, and I forgot 100%, 105,000%, I forgot that you have a Pickaway Ross journey tomorrow and that you won't be in class tomorrow. So good for you. Good for you, I guess. Right? You'll have to take the test on Wednesday. Having said that, what's this test going to be over? One person knows, two people know what this test is over. It's supposed to be tomorrow, people. What is the test going to be over? Are you going to trust in your natural intelligence to get you through this like you always have? Never had to study, right? Because I just show up to class. Is that how you approach cross country? I just show up to the race, finish in the top 5, just show up to the soccer pitch. The field's called the pitch, right?
I don't think so.
You prepare, don't you? And by the way, just so you remember, all of these tests are going to take entire periods. They're supposed to anyway. That's what they're designed to do. Why, Mr. Beavers? Why? Because I hate people. No, that's not the reason why. It's because I'm trying to prepare you. Almost always, in your athletic competition or your band competition or whatever you're in, the practice takes longer than the game. And a lot of times the practices, especially those 2-a-days at the beginning of the year, are harder than the game because you're getting prepared for making the game easier, right? I promise, if you stick with me, if you trust me and trust the process, embrace the Mr. Beavers process. Embrace it. Hug it. Put it next to your bed and snuggle at night with the process. When you get to that test, that end of course exam, it's going to feel like it's a breeze. That instead of taking 2.5 hours, like your English and your math, and not your math, you'll be like done in like 2 seconds, right, Tim? But like every other test, it'll take you half an hour, and you would have gotten a 4 or 5. It's going to be easy if you just trust the process. Grant, what is the test about? And populism and progressivism. The failure of the populists and some of their successes, and then local, state, and national level progressivism. We've had 2 presidents that are national, obviously. We've had 2 people who are on the national level. One, Teddy Roosevelt. That was a net puzzle last week. Today is Woodrow Wilson. Probably not any relation to Tim Wilson, although we could probably look at that up. Do your people come from Virginia? Okay, well, all right. All right, if you're ready, let's go ahead and go. Because I have not managed my time well today. I tried to make this point about midterm elections at the end of this, and I'm just not having time because we only have 39 minutes. Okay. When we get to big presidents, I've got to talk about their biography a little bit. I'm not going to tell you about Grover Cleveland's biography or Benjamin Harris's biography. Did you know that Benjamin Harrison was nicknamed the human iceberg? Yeah, he was that not friendly with people. Like, he was just aloof back, right? Anyway, Teddy Roosevelt, he's on Mount Rushmore. I gave you some of his background and biography because I want you to know the man behind the myth or whatever. Woodrow Wilson, not my favorite president, as you'll see, but he was very, very influential. A lot of the things that we do today, we do because he did. He started it. So a lot of these things, too, we'll be talking about. It is more about his World War I handling than it is about his progressivism. But I think that there are some things in here that we can get. So we will talk about him after Thanksgiving as a World War I president. But now let's talk about his domestic policies. Here's who he was as a person. He was the first Southern president since Zachary Taylor. I know you all know who Zachary Taylor was. He was president like 12, 13 years before the Civil War. He's the first Southern president since before the Civil War. He was born in Virginia. He was born in a former slave-owning state. More of a pacifist at first, details. Headphones. Oh, no, do this. Oh, do this first. Yeah. Ren thought I was talking just for my health. Tisk, Ren. You'll find that he tried to keep us out of World War I for about 3 years-ish. So more of a pacifist at first. And then he takes like ownership of World War I and just goes with it, right? But we'll get to that later. He was the president of Princeton, an Ivy League school, you know, where Harvard and Yale is, right? So he was very intellectual. He was the only president to ever have been a college president before. And he had a very deep knowledge of government. That is where his background was. I feel like I have failed Ren. I feel like I failed you to prepare you for this. You got it? Okay. Y'all good now? Today we believe that presidents should be the leader of the country, that the president should set the agenda. That's what most of us think anyway. At least we think that when our party's in office, right? And then if they're not, then we are through. But we believe that because Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt started that. Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson were like, we're in charge. Presidents before that didn't necessarily think that. I mean, Benjamin Harrison was more of a laid back kind of like, I would just kind of manage what Congress wants to do. That's it. He believed in strong centralized executive power. He believed that it was the president's job to be the legislative leader, which means that on day one, he sets this huge legislative agenda, boom, right on the desk of Congress and says, you pass that. And that's what we expect presidents to do today. Not Congress being the leader, like during the late 1800s, but the president being the leader. He believed in appealing directly over the heads of Congress to the people. What do I mean by that? Instead of negotiating with Congress, like President Biden has been doing in this first year, instead of negotiating with buzzers that are going off in the middle of class that are, I'm going to find it. I'm going to. All right, fine.
I was checking.
It's no problem. Yeah, because President Biden was in the Senate. He knows how to, quote unquote, he knows how the quote sausage is made, right? If you've ever seen sausage made, it's a really messy, nasty process. He knows how to do it. Can you think of any president who was like Wilson? Any president recently who's like Wilson, who didn't go to Congress and try to negotiate, but like went over them around Congress to the people directly? Especially using Twitter. Yeah. He loved humanity rather than individuals. You see, Teddy Roosevelt was more of a guy who would, you know, you could go up to him and he'd like slap you on the back. He's like, "Hi, how you doing, pal? What's up?" Right? Kind of a friendly guy. You know, kiss the babies, that kind of thing. And Woodrow Wilson wasn't that friendly. He was, you know, aloof. He did love humanity, human beings in general, worldwide, the big picture things. But as far as like interpersonal relationships, not as good, especially when it came to compromise. And when it came to trying to get his way, whereas Roosevelt would bully you in person, Woodrow Wilson would be more like intellectual bullying. Look at all these peasants. Working class scum. Right? That kind of thing. And he was probably arguably the smartest president we've ever had, arguably. Very idealistic. When we get to World War I, you'll see that he had this perfect vision of what the world is supposed to look like, this utopia that he wanted in a post-World War I world. And he was probably right, but he was about 20 years too soon. And he wanted to go faster and drag Congress and the people with him when they weren't ready yet to go the way he wanted. You'll see what I mean by that later. And probably because of his Presbyterian upbringing, very religious man, he also thought that there was a extreme right and wrong in the world. And I know right, and if you disagree with me, then you are obviously wrong. He made William Jennings Bryan his Secretary of State. William Jennings Bryan who had lost 3 presidential elections by this point. We talked about the first one, 1896, when he lost to McKinley. He lost to McKinley again in 1900, and then he lost to William Howard Taft in 1908. Anybody taking sports history? Nobody's in sports history class, and you may not get this reference. William Jennings Bryan was the Buffalo Bills of presidential hopefuls. In the 1990s, do you know how many straight consecutive Super Bowls the Bills got to? 4. They lost 4 in a row. How do you get to 4 Super Bowls in a row in the first place? And then how do you lose all 4? No, well, that's probably true too. He puts him as Secretary of State, and then a young Franklin Delano Roosevelt takes the place of his cousin, who had once been Undersecretary of the Navy or Assistant Secretary to the Navy. Okay, here's why I don't like President Wilson. And I shouldn't say I don't like him. I should not say I don't like him, because isn't that the problem with our society today? When you disagree with somebody over policy or some kind of issue, like you're like, oh, I hate you because you disagree with me. Like, hasn't that gotten us to a really bad place? And I don't hate him. I very much disagree with some of his ideas and laws and attitudes, if that makes any sense. I would hope that my Christianity would help me love the person and hate the sin, love the sinner kind of thing, right? But, I mean, having said that, he was a racist jerk. He premiered Birth of a Nation at the White House. Have you ever heard of this movie? Here is the cover. Sorry, not the cover, the movie poster of this movie. Yes, that is a Klansman on a horse. This movie comes out in 1915, and it's basically looking back to the 1870s when the Klan had been active in the South, and it's basically saying those were the good old days. Understand too that in 1915 the Klan was making a resurgence. It was a second wave of the Klan coming out, and so the president premiering this. Do you know what I mean by premiere? Yeah, like if you're president, you get special perks, right? You get to show a movie before it comes out in the theaters, and yeah, that's an endorsement, right? It would be like, what if Donald Trump had showed The Triumph of the Will, the propaganda movie about glorifying Adolf Hitler, right? I mean, people would have frowned on that, right? And rightfully so. And so, I mean, that's not the only thing. He instituted, he started segregation in Washington, D.C. Yikes. He told racist jokes in his White House cabinet meetings. Okay, so like almost every single person in the world told a racist joke at one point or another, right? But that just goes like, it just is like piling on here. And possibly was a eugenicist. If you don't know what eugenics is, anybody know what eugenics? It was supposed to be one of the leading scientific ideas of the day. And here is it in a nutshell. We need, as human beings, to push evolution on faster. Charles Darwin's idea of evolution is true, but evolutionary progress it's not going fast enough. So we need to push it faster. What does that mean? That basically means all these stupid imbeciles out here keep marrying stupid imbeciles, and they have stupid imbeciles as children. And they're having a lot of them. And so we need to keep them from procreating. And all of a sudden it goes from funny to not so funny, right? There was a movement to sterilize the imbecile. And when I say imbecile, like there's a technical term for imbecile. Like if your IQ was below a certain number, sterilize you so that you couldn't have babies. Because we want the smart people to marry and have smart kids. And how do we know if you're smart or not? This is the advent of IQ tests, the beginning of IQ tests. And every single IQ test, I mean, conservative, liberal, like everybody agrees that these early IQ tests were extremely biased against certain ethnic groups, right? Jewish people, African Americans, people from Southern and Eastern Asia, or well, Asia too, but Europe, right? When you have a bias test, of course you're going to score lower, right? And so it was legal. It was actually legal in the United States to forcibly sterilize women who had below a certain IQ. Look it up. It's a Supreme Court case called Buck versus Bell. It comes out in like 1923, and it says it is constitutional to sterilize the imbecile. And this is the kind of stuff that progressives like Woodrow Wilson was advocating. Now, this next one, you can make an, if you disagree with me on these, then I don't know. We'd probably have to have a long conversation involving a lot of me yelling at you for reasons. But if you disagree with this one, okay, I get it. Like, you could make a case if you wanted to. I probably wouldn't agree with you but what these did during World War I was take away some people's First Amendment rights, freedom of speech and press. And this one, you can disagree with me on this, and there's no problem with that, because some people want the federal government to be bigger and take on more responsibility. And I guess that we could have a reasonable disagreement on that. But these four right here just really rubbed me the wrong way. Now, here's what he looks like. Notice his eyeglasses. They're called the Nez Perce. I do kind of hope this comes back, because notice it has no arms. They just pinch onto your nose, and they don't have these, what do you call these things? Arms? Yeah, they don't have those. Teddy Roosevelt had them too. Okay. Whereas Teddy Roosevelt's promise to the American people was the square deal, Woodrow Wilson's promise to the American people was called the New Freedom. And in the New Freedom, Wilson wanted to attack the triple wall of privilege. Wilson said, if we attack these three things, that's all we need to do to fix the problems of the country. These three things: attack the trusts, attack the tariffs, attack the reform, how we do money and banking. If we attack this triple wall of privilege, where the most elite and powerful people in the country have their influence, then that will restore the American dream to the average person. That's what that was his claim. And so you'll see that these three things are addressed in 1913 and 1914, in basically his first year in office. And he's very successful early on in getting progressive laws passed. So let's look at these three things. Tariff reform. The name of the major law in here was the Underwood Tariff of 1913. To try to explain this in a nutshell before I get into the notes, just understand this, that businesses wanted higher tariffs, higher taxes on imports, and they would lobby congressmen to get those higher taxes on imports. And what that means, lobby, that means basically kind of bribe, right? The problem with this is not only are you bribing to get your way, but also when you raise tariffs, that also raises consumer goods at home. It makes things at home more expensive as well. It's a complicated process, but just trust me, it does. Higher tariffs, higher prices at home. Lower tariffs, lower prices at home. The Underwood Tariff wants to lower taxes, and so on goods that are coming in from other countries. And so what Woodrow Wilson does is he does something that nobody has done since the second president of the United States, John Adams. He appears before Congress himself to make the State of the Union address. Only George Washington and John Adams had ever done this before. Now today, this is like a big ceremony, right? It's a big thing. Like, it's a party. Like, you'll be like on January 20th or something like that. You'll be flipping through the channels at home, or you'll be at the YMCA and you'll be on the treadmill and you'll be like, man, I want to watch some Monday Night Football. And instead, every single network has a president speaking before the Congress. And the first thing that pops into your head is, oh my gosh, what if there's a bomb? The whole federal government's gone, right? Because it's not only the president and the vice president, but it's the Speaker of the House and all of Congress and all the Supreme Court justices, right? That's scary. The other thing that you're worried, you might wonder is, why can't I change the channel and find something on? It's like even ESPN has the State of the Union address on it. It's like driving me crazy, right? So he actually goes before Congress, the first person since John Adams. See, everybody else before him had sent a page to read it instead. And he stands before Congress. He has the audacity to come himself. Some would say the arrogance to come himself. And he asked for this, and he got it. And it lowered most taxes on foreign goods to about 27%, meaning that if you were a businessman bringing goods to the United States from a foreign country, if you brought $100 worth of goods, you'd pay $27 in taxes. And that was lowering it. Also, because this is lowering taxes on foreign goods is going to decrease the amount of money that the federal government gets. That's got to be replaced from somewhere. And so this law, because the 16th Amendment is now ratified, enacts an income tax. Remember that the income tax was supposed to hurt rich people. Take away their money, take away their power. Now, it wasn't a big one. See here, married men making $5,000 a year would only pay about $10, so it's not that big of a deal. But it's a progressive tax, which means the more money you make, the higher the percentage on your taxes are. Okay? Income taxes replace the tariff as the main source of income. This is very progressive. One reason is because lower tariffs means lower prices for consumers at home. But the other reason is that it's progressive is that it limits this government business marriage where businessmen bribe and lobby congressmen to get the higher tariffs. And if we don't have high tariffs anymore, then we don't have this government business bribing circle going on. And like I said, it's also a graduated income tax or a progressive income tax. The more money you make, the more money you're taxed, the higher percentage you're taxed. And today, if you believe that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates should pay their fair share, then you're thinking exactly like the progressives did way back in even 1913. Right? We are all progressives in some way, shape, or form today, I would argue. Okay, that's the first thing. He says 2 more things, and we've got it made. We've restored the American dream. So the next thing he wants to tackle is money. Now, just so you know, the little green dollar bills that you have, does anybody have a $1 bill? Can you get it out and just so you can have it and look at it? You don't have to pass it around. Dude, he brought out like a whole wad of cash. Oh, okay, just one. Yours will work. It may not work as well as the $1 bill because the $1 bill has like the city on it. You have a one, just take it out and look at it, right? What does it say at the top? Federal Reserve note, right? And yours says that too, right? Okay, we haven't always had these. These are relatively new since 1913. These are only like 100 years old. We haven't had these. In fact, we haven't had greenbacks at all until 1863 when, during the Civil War, we had this idea to have a national bank that issued greenback money. Now, of course, everything that's new seems to be challenged in the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court actually said a few years later, yes, greenback dollars are constitutional. The Congress can issue these kind of things, right? But then we still don't have those dollar bills yet. We just have dollar bills that say, U.S. government on them. Then in 1907, there's a panic that is pretty much confined to Wall Street. But the problem is, when there's a panic that is pretty much confined to Wall Street, it still affects most of the country because all of our money seems to be invested right here. So a small, short-lived panic that's in this one tiny area can affect the entire country. We're too centralized, and so that's a problem. The moneyed interests are concentrated in New York City. That's what the Pujo Committee found when they did this investigation as far as why did this panic happen. And then there was another committee called the Aldrich Monetary Commission. Both of these two committees and commissions basically said, we've got to fix the way that our system works because everything is focused too much in one place. And so what happened was the progressives in 1913 gave us the Federal Reserve Act. And this is what gives you those dollar bills that some of you have in your hand right now. I'll try to explain it in a little bit, but go ahead and get these blanks filled in so that, and then I can explain it all at once. Also, keep in mind that in addition to the Federal Reserve, the 16th Amendment passed as well. That was also another money reform that allowed us to directly tax the federal government, to directly tax people's paychecks. Now, what is the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is basically a private bank that has heavy government oversight. The president gets to appoint the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and the Senate has to confirm it. Essentially, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is, I would argue, the second most powerful person in the country, next to the president, because the chairman of the Federal Reserve basically is controlling the value of our money. And they can do that. They can adjust inflation and deflation. You'll learn in government class by adjusting interest rates, the reserve requirement, but also they can just flat out print more money or destroy money to help get rid of inflation or deflation. So look at the top of your dollar bill. It says at the top, Federal Reserve note. This is a Federal Reserve bank note, backed by the federal government, but it's really put out by this kind of semi-private bank. And notice here too, Bank of the Federal Reserve, and there is a city. Now, Emma, what's the city in your little circle right there?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston. And Peyton? The little, is there a letter in a circle over there on the left-hand side? A D. What's that little city right underneath there? You might need bifocals.
I need glasses.
Okay, fair enough.
So happy.
Slater to the rescue.
Cleveland.
Cleveland!
Thanks, later.
Mistake on the lake. You see, here's the thing. The Federal Reserve, yes, has one place in New York City. But if there's a financial panic that hits that one area, it's not going to take down the entire country, because look, there are 11 other areas. There's San Francisco, Kansas City, St. Louis, the mistake on the lake. And what did you say, Emma? Boston, Massachusetts? Yeah. Right? Hotlanta, Dallas, Minneapolis, right? It's all over the country. Just keep in mind that next year, or maybe even this year for some of you, you're going to learn about the Federal Reserve and the reserve requirement and interest rates and so on. So there's more to it than that. But a very progressive way to control inflation and deflation. We're not looking at necessarily the populist way with bimetallism. We're looking at a central bank to do it instead. The last of the three things that Wilson said we need to attack are trusts and monopolies. Remember, Standard Oil was busted up. Now, the first attempt was actually done under Teddy Roosevelt, which is kind of surprising to me, because Teddy Roosevelt believed in good trusts and bad trusts. The bad trusts are destructive to society. We need to get rid of them. The good trusts should stay because they are beneficial to the United States. Apparently, this judge, Kennesaw Landis, decided that he wanted to try to break up Standard Oil in 1907. It didn't work. I give you his name right here just in case you like baseball trivia. He was the first Major League Baseball commissioner, as well as the guy who tried to break up Standard Oil first, but that's just trivia. In 1911, we saw that Standard Oil was finally broken up. We watched that in a video under William Howard Taft's presidency, who busted like twice as many trusts as Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster. And they used the Sherman Antitrust Act to bust up Standard Oil. But under Woodrow Wilson, one of the things he wanted to use to watch for trusts being formed and monopolies was called the Federal Trade Commission, and the FTC is still with us today. The legacy of the progressive era is still with us today. And the FTC, the Federal Reserve, blah, blah, blah. Now, notice here it said, this is a watchdog agency. What that means is, just like a watchdog barks when there's danger, the FTC is going to monitor the economy, monitor businesses, And when they get too close to monopoly status, they're going to slap fines on them or issue cease and desist orders or force them to bust up. To give this teeth and to reform the Sherman Antitrust Act, we also get the Clayton Antitrust Act. The Clayton Antitrust Act is the Progressive Antitrust Act. And under this, Woodrow Wilson basically says there is no such thing as a good or a bad trust. They're all bad. Size matters. The bigger you are, the more you need busted up. One of the differences between the Clayton Act and the Sherman Act, though, was that the Sherman Act had busted up unions in the 1800s, and the Clayton Act specifically says that union activity is not something that we are going to try to bust up. So, unions like the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, was given legitimacy under this law. So, by the early part of 1914, Woodrow Wilson thinks that he has restored the American dream because he has attacked trusts, banks, and tariffs. As you'll see, that wasn't the only thing that happened. He didn't think there was need for anything else, but progressivism kept on going. Okay, there was voting reform. We get the 17th Amendment, which started under Taft, but took effect. It was ratified under Taft, but took effect under Wilson. We now have direct election of U.S. senators. Also, speaking of voting, women get the right to vote. Suffrage cannot be denied on the basis of your biological sex. Remember that you need to know this too, just in case you haven't done it, right? Since you weren't here on Friday. There were 3 things you needed to do on Friday, right? An ed puzzle and a couple forms. You might remember from one of those forms that Woodrow Wilson was not so hot on women's suffrage at first. He was like, let the states take care of it. But eventually he kind of comes around to it. I would say it's as much that women had served a vital role during World War I that they get the right to vote as much as progressivism. But, it is what it is. Do you remember this from that form? What is this form? What is this picture saying? Woodrow Wilson is a what? Who else? Who was the actual Kaiser in the world in 1917? Right country, wrong era. Hitler was just a youth. Yeah, he was the king of Germany. He was a dictator. No, Kaiser Wilhelm II. He's a dictator. And this is saying, Wilson, you're a dictator. You're worried about liberating Germany from the Kaiser when you've got all of these women over here who don't have liberty here? Are you kidding me? Take the plank out of your own eye. That's from the Bible, where Jesus says, if you got a problem with somebody else, you got a small problem with somebody else, you might, instead of trying to take the speck out of their eye, take the big problem, the big plank out of your own eye first, and then you can see to get the plank, the little speck out of their eye, right? And that's what they're saying. This is a biblical reference saying, we've got problems here. Stop worrying about over there. Now, it was legal in 1914, in 1913, to buy cocaine and syringes in the Sears catalog and have it delivered to you. The Narcotics Act got rid of that. And of course, prohibition on alcohol comes maybe as much because we wanted to ration grain during World War I as much as any progressive or religious idea. But control of moral behavior there. There is the first national child labor law under Wilson. As you can see, it was overturned after 2 years. But at least the progressives made the attempt. Supreme Court case Hammer versus Dagenhart overturned the Keating-Owen Act. Now the bell might ring. The next one is about farmers. It seems like the progressives helped the farmers on the national level more than the populists did. And I'll change that in just a second. By helping get farmers low interest rates for loans, buying their crops and then keeping those crops off of the market so that farmers would get the money, and then the crop prices would go up, and then helping pave roads so farmers could get their big machinery down the way without running into a ditch every 5 yards. So low crops and farmers. Then if you had the ability to finish this is where I wanted to make my big point at the end of this, and I'll have to just wait, I guess, till later. If you want to get this now, you can, or I'm going to put the PowerPoint on Classroom in a minute, so you can wait till then if you want. Make sure you study. Make sure you're prepared. Don't do anything stupid while you're down at the JVS. Make us look bad. Yeah.
I need to get my things done that they're supposed to because I still would do it.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, I have a very small late penalty if it's in by the next day.
If my eyes are cracked, they said that I can get one. So I said you have one eye open. One eye open. Kids are cracked. Make sure you get your test.
I got it. I got my food after I get my lunch. We'll see how it goes.
I'm going to make a point for the purpose of the recording, so don't mind me if I start shouting out random things here. For those of you who are at home, understand that these are the bills. This is the Bill of Rights right here. So on the end of course exam, you will not, if they say, which ones are the progressive amendments, you will not click amendments 1 through 10. Those are the Bill of Rights from the very early part of our country. When you're asked what are the progressive amendments, you'll look at these right here. These are the ones we talked about. Direct income tax, direct election of U.S. senators, prohibition and women's right to vote. Now, you can ignore this for just a second. What I do want to look at here real quick for those of you watching at home. Basically is taking that last slide that had notes to fill in and asking you to kind of evaluate this, because look, here is 1912 when Woodrow Wilson was elected. And just so you remember, he's running against Republican Taft, Progressive Bull Moose Party candidate Teddy Roosevelt, Socialist Eugene Debs. And these two split the conservative, or at least the Republican vote, I should say, and that helps Woodrow Wilson win in 1912. So Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, wins here. Now, that means he's up for re-election in 1916. And spoiler alert, he actually doesn't win. Right? But 1912, 1916. The election that happens in 1914 is called the midterm election. And this happens in late 1914. This is in November. All of the laws that we looked at early on in the triple wall of privilege, the tariffs, the banks, the trusts, all of those laws were passed in 1913 and early 1914. All before this. And Woodrow Wilson said, you know what, this is all we need to do. Just attack that triple wall of privilege. That's it. That's all we need to do, and we will have restored the American dream. But what happens in 1914 is that progressives take a whole bunch of seats in Congress in the 1914 midterm elections. And these are progressives who want more than just attacking the banks, the trusts, and the tariffs. They want more than that. And Woodrow Wilson reads the writing on the wall. He sees the people are wanting more aggressive progressive legislation, and so I'm going to give it to them. And all of those things that had to do with farmers, child labor, what was the other ones? I mean, there's actually several other just worker protection laws that I didn't talk about. All of those come during this time period. The Narcotics Act, so the drug laws, all of those come during this time period. And what this shows us is the effect of midterm elections. Almost always, I promise you, almost always, midterm elections go against the president that's in office. They go against the party of the president that's in office. And if a president is wise, they will read the signs and they will negotiate. So here you can see Woodrow Wilson said, we don't need anything besides these laws over here, trusts, tariffs, and banks. But when it seems like the country wants more things like child labor laws and farming laws and, workers' laws, he's willing to negotiate. He negotiates, did I write that? With the progressives. I promise you, not every single president has done this. For example, President Obama was elected in 2008. He was up for re-election in 2012, but there were these midterm elections right here, 2010. And in those midterm elections, Obama was a Democrat. In these midterm elections, Republicans killed it. There was a quote-unquote red wave where Republicans just took over the House of Representatives. And they called themselves Tea Party members, looking back to the Boston Tea Party. And some people said the Tea Party means taxed enough already. And they really didn't like Obamacare. And after that, during these years right here, President Obama had a real problem getting his legislative agenda accomplished. Even actually out to 2016, he had a lot of trouble getting his legislative agenda accomplished because he did not know compromise. Or at least he wasn't as willing to negotiate as Woodrow Wilson was down here. And for about 6 years, it seemed like there was a lot of things stalled in our country because this midterm election kept the results of it, went against Obama's party, and then he failed to really, really reach across the aisle. But, to be honest, the Republicans weren't really reaching across the aisle to negotiate either, to be quite honest. I mean, they, for heaven's sake, in 2016, they decided to not even hold hearings on a Supreme Court nominee that he tried to get in there, right? And so I guess the reason why I want you to know this now is for current events' sake. Get rid of that. Okay, let me go back to the pen. Joe Biden elected. Oh, and by the way, Donald Trump didn't really negotiate very well either after the 2018 midterm elections when Democrats had a blue wave. So, and his legislative agenda got stalled too. Nope. I'm coming. So, Joe Biden was elected in 2020, and he's up for re-election in 2024. We are in 2021. the midterm election that's coming up is 2022. And if everything goes as it always has in the past, with Biden being a Democrat, then the prediction by most people is that in these midterm elections here, that Republicans are going to get into office. Democrats right now have the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. The prediction is that the Republicans are going to take at least the House, if not the Senate, both in 2022. And the question is, if that happens, will Joe Biden be willing to compromise and negotiate with the Republicans? If so, then laws might get passed, like happened down here. If not, it might turn out to be like Obama and Trump's experience, where they didn't get much done. So that's that. Thank you for paying attention and listening.